An attack is ratcheting up on women's reproductive freedoms with an insidious campaign targeting women of color. It began with the making of a documentary saying that abortion amounts to genocide. This past spring, billboards appeared in Atlanta proclaiming that African American babies are an endangered species, all part of an effort to pass new restrictive legislation on reproductive freedom in Georgia. Then this summer, a group called Priests for Life made an attempt to co-opt some of the strongest imagery in the civil rights tradition, freedom rides, but with a new label, Freedom Rides for Life.
Wherever they can find what they call an urban or black audience, they're going to try to raise hell with this kind of campaign.
In this special series, we'll investigate each part of this right-wing strategy. We'll look at who's behind it and where the money comes from. The documentary.
The abortion industry, at this point, kills as many African American people every 4 days as the Klan killed in 150 years.
This film was created by an organization called Life Dynamics. It's a group of wealthy white men who, for whatever reason, decided in 2008 or 9 that they were concerned about black babies being aborted. They assert that Margaret Sanger founded Planned Parenthood for the sole purpose of exterminating the black race.
We'll report on the Billboard campaign.
These billboards were funded by the Georgia Right to Life campaign, which are primarily white people who recognize the value of targeting the black community.
We shall overcome.
And we'll investigate who's behind the Freedom Rides.
Priests for Life are an organization that was set up mainly as a vehicle for Frank Pavone to develop his personality. At one stage, they claimed maybe 5,000 priest members. Well, at that time, there were more than 40,000 priests in the United States. So it was a relatively small percentage of priests. They've gone from being a $4 or $5 million organization 6 or 7 years ago to being about a $10 million organization now.
We reaffirm black women's power and agency and our civil rights legacy.
We'll analyze what effect this strategy is having on choice as well as on the Democratic base. And we'll go behind the scenes to see how activists for reproductive justice are fighting back.
We have this whole racist ideology being perpetuated under the disguise of protecting the unborn. And we think that this is just another part of the right-wing strategy to undermine the November elections.
In meetings across the country, activists stress that it's not just about abortion. Playing it that way has split the movement along lines of race. The right to give birth safely with health care that suits the mother is just as important as the right to abort. It's all part of the larger struggle for what activists call reproductive health and justice.
It's not useful to isolate abortion from all the other health issues that a woman has to deal with. In fact, before a woman even decides whether or not to have a child, she has this oh my God moment when she first thinks she's pregnant, where she's wondering about whether she has health care, whether she can keep her job, whether she'll get battered by her boyfriend or husband if she tells him she's pregnant. And so we call those issues that are ahead of the decision the human rights issues that she has to deal with before she even gets to the decision to have or to not have the child.
Although the documentary was first on the scene in 2009, the right-wing strategy against abortion in communities of color crystallized around a Billboard campaign in Georgia this past year. In Atlanta, Loretta Ross has been organizing women of color around issues of reproductive justice for 3 decades.
Well, I think the whole campaign behind the billboards is, number one, to drive abortion providers out of business, to make them suffer criminal liability if they're found to have provided an abortion to a woman who can later claim, well, I was coerced and I aborted my child because of his race or because of his sex. So it's going to drive providers out of business. But I actually think that there's a larger campaign behind it. There is an effort actually to drive a wedge in the African American community using these social issues like abortion, gay marriage, immigration, because I think that wedge is necessary because the most consolidated, intact part of Obama's base is the African American community. And I think the third goal, though, which to me is the most insidious, is that they're trying to make black women feel ashamed about our choices.
Catherine Davis, Director of Minority Outreach at Georgia Right to Life, sums up what the Billboard campaign is all about.
Here in Georgia, for the last several years, the numbers of abortions on black women have met or exceeded 15,000 to 18,000 now a year. And that's been sustained over a 10-12 year period. And so I began to look at, well, why are African American women having more abortions than other ethnic groups? And I didn't quite accept or believe the notion that black women have more unintended pregnancies, as many had suggested. So as I did the research, I found that there was a pseudoscience called eugenics that was behind the abortion movement in the nation. And that science wanted to limit the birth rate of blacks. And I found that 100% of the clinics in this state are in urban areas where blacks reside. And that for some reason, black women were going to those clinics more than anyone else. And I believe it's because they were being targeted.
With that in mind, Georgia Right to Life sponsored legislation to criminalize certain abortions under racketeering laws.
The onerous provisions of the bill would place physicians in a very difficult situation of breaking the law, but the added measures of being gangsters, if you will, for participating in this practice. If they can get it passed here, then this is an agenda that they can take to every state, and then once this agenda gets that proverbial foot in the door, then it would make way for other egregious legislative agenda attempts.
While abortion isn't a topic much talked about in the African American community, particularly by the church, some pastors were outraged by the campaign.
It's a divisive issue, abortion. It's a controversial issue. There is not one voice or one opinion within the African American community as it relates to abortion. I think the discussion is good. I think the discussion is healthy that we're having. But we want to be clear that we don't fall into the notion of just pro-life. Most of these folk who are behind these billboards, they're not pro-life. They're pro-birth, but they're not pro-life. They don't care what happens to the child once the child gets here. They don't care about their health care. They don't care about their education. They don't care about their futures.
In the end, the legislation didn't pass.
By the end of the session, Georgia Right to Life went ahead and admitted that that's fine. We want it to be unconstitutional because this will be our challenge for Roe v. Wade.
But the Billboard campaign was considered a success, and it's spreading to other states. At Political Research Associates, a progressive think tank in Somerville, Mass., Pam Chamberlain reports that Ryan Baumberger, a former ad man, provided the creative design for the campaign using a nonprofit he set up with his wife called the Radiance Foundation. Initial financing was provided by Georgia Right to Life, which has a budget of more than $750,000. This is the same primarily white organization which hired Catherine Davis to do their outreach.
The Radiance Foundation is now negotiating with organizations in 6 or 8 other states to do similar campaigns in the future. Ideally, these are states with communities with high proportions of African Americans. The same strategy. So the fact that they're thinking that they will duplicate or replicate this strategy indicates to me that they feel that they've had some success.
And as we look at who's behind the billboards, they are certainly promoting black faces, but who is really behind it is the radical religious right. It's the same old divisive propaganda that they've always used of dividing and conquering within the African American community. But this time they're not going to get away with it because you're messing with our babies, and they're important to us.
The response to our Billboard campaign has more than less been accepted positively. Those people who are pro-abortion, of course, have been very angry and very against our attempt to educate the people of Georgia about the impact that abortion is having. And they have vilified me, they vilified Ryan Baumberger, who is the creative genius behind the Billboard campaign, in saying that somehow we are victimizing black women, we are dehumanizing black children, and that is not at all what we are doing. We are educating.
Loretta Ross agrees with Davis that reproductive health has a race component to it, but that's about where their agreement ends.
I think that certain women are encouraged to have children by our society and certain women are discouraged. So in that, we probably agree. But when it comes to the question of who decides, who should be in control, that's where we disagree. Because I think the best way to fight population control, to fight genocide, is to make sure that the objects of that genocide or that control make those decisions for themselves. So I think black women need not only the right to have an abortion, but the access, the money, the conditions under which they can decide their fertility for themselves. On the other hand, she would like to enact laws that keep black women from having control, that keep black women from having options.
Over the course of the summer, the Billboard effort spread as far as Texas and has taken on a whole new message. It now preaches adoption.
Now, obviously, they haven't quite thought this through. Frankly, I'm a woman who at 14 became pregnant through incest. It was not voluntary at all, okay? At the time my son was born, and I had to carry that pregnancy to term because it was pre-Roe, 1969, I had the option of giving my child up for adoption. I found that I couldn't do it. You know, I took one look at his face and I couldn't do it. So I ended up parenting that kid, and I'm glad I had him. I'm glad I parented him. But at the same time, anyone who acts like it's just so easy to carry a child to term, give birth, and then just hand the baby over to somebody else, obviously has never done it. And the women I've talked to who have done it often regret having done it. Even more so than these so-called women who regret their abortions. And so it's a scheme designed to make black women feel guilty. It builds on the fantasy of adoption being easy. And it ignores the fact that something like 4 out of 5 children in adoption agencies that are hard to place are African American. It's based upon this romanticized fantasy of, I think, one man, Ryan Baumberger, whose mother, according to him, was a victim of rape who gave him up for adoption. Well, frankly, I can somewhat understand that a rape victim may not want to raise a rapist child. Okay? But that is not the situation most pregnant women dealing with an unplanned pregnancy are in. They're trying to soften their approach. Let's pivot off of the abortion message that they used last time, black children are an endangered species, into this adoption message so that they can be the kinder, gentler face. But again, they're not living in the real world of women.
Well, I helped Jim Pinto run the Operation Rescues here.
Adding fuel to the fire created by the Billboard campaign, Priests for Life, another predominantly white group, staged their first freedom rides for life in Birmingham and Atlanta. They also claim that abortion clinics are targeting poor black women, just as Georgia Right to Life does. Remember what Catherine Davis said?
100% of the clinics in this state are in urban areas where blacks reside.
There are 15 abortion providers in the state of Georgia. Only 4 of them out of the 15 are in predominantly black neighborhoods. So that's no majority by a long shot. And I'm surprised that there aren't even more in black neighborhoods, because this is a state where almost half the population is African American. So it wouldn't have surprised me if 50% were in black neighborhoods, 50% were in white neighborhoods. But in fact, it's only 4 of 15. And so that's a lie.
We shall overcome.
We'll report on Priests for Life, their founder, Father Pavone, and their Freedom Rides for Life in our next segment.